Dr. Jordan Peterson tweeted out today, "For the first time in my career, my research grant funding was denied. I was near the top of every other application cycle. This was the money that would have funded my research into the personality predictors of political correctness and liberalism conservatism. Social Science and Humanities Research Council grant reviewers are anonymous." Dr. Peterson became popular on the internet among skeptic channels, appearing on many popular channels as a guest star after his debate over the passing of Canadian Bill C-16. C-16 extends hate speech provisions to the Human Rights Tribunal of Toronto to include that of gender pronouns. We'll take a look at some of the clips from that debate, but first here's a clip I found of him bashing communism and Marxism, and he phrased so perfectly what I have never been able to.
And then when the Marxists say, well, that wasn't real Marxism, what it really means, and I've thought about this for a long time, it's the most arrogant possible statement anyone could ever make. It means, if I would have been in Stalin's position, I would have ushered in the damn utopia instead of the genocidal massacres, because I understand the doctrine of Marxism and everything about me is good. It's like, well, think again, sunshine. You don't understand it. You don't understand it. And you're not that good. And if the power was in your hands, assuming you had the competence, which you don't, you wouldn't have done any better. And even if you had, there would have been someone else waiting right behind you to shoot you the first time you actually tried to do anything good. And that's what happened to all the old guard who ran the damn revolution. Stalin rounded them all up and shot them, along with their families and millions of other people. So even if you do happen to be that avatar of moral purity that you claim implicitly, the probability that you'd get to act out your goodness in relationship to those possessed by your ideology is zero.
The rest of these clips will be from that debate I mentioned earlier, so let's take a quick look at some of the things he said there.
I would like to point out, before I answer that, just so you all notice, is that I have in fact been denounced today. And what I am saying has in fact been described as hate propaganda. So one thing I'd like to suggest to you, every single person in the audience, you're next. So keep it in mind.
And a lot of what we've been hearing here is hate propaganda.
And that is Dr. Mary Bryson, who was arguing against Dr. Jordan Peterson and actually spent the entire time talking about his character rather than the arguments that he was addressing. So we'll take a look at her at the end, because in a way old video that I did, I took a look at an article about her past and how she seems to hate men. Big surprise there. But the other thing was that her Rate My Professor page was absolutely riddled. I went and checked on it just now. Not only is that article not around anymore, but my video of it is, so I caught snapshots of the entire article. But also, the Rate My Professor page has now only one review on it. Something to keep in mind, but we'll take a look at some more Dr. Peterson first.
Things it builds in, for example, is the claim that identity is only subjectively defined. And that's built right in. It says that. Your identity is whatever you think it is. Well, let me tell you, as a practicing psychologist, that's absolute rubbish. See, what's happened is that I haven't refused to use someone's gender-neutral pronouns. I said that I would refuse. So it's not even the refusal itself that's producing the letters. It's my declared intent to engage in the refusal. And as far as I was concerned, what I was essentially doing was criticizing a piece of legislation that had not yet been passed. But the university's legal department decided that all that was sufficient for them to distance themselves from me and to engage in disciplinary activity. So very strongly that all these people that continually talk to you about compassion do not, in the least, have your best interests in mind. And there are far more virtues and values than an excessive pity for people. You know, you don't want to pity your children even. You want to encourage them to develop in a strong and forthright manner so that they can go out and take on the world. And so I'm going to read you something that a graduate student sent me from the University of Toronto the other day. And I can also tell you that I've received hundreds of letters like this. Today, I had a tutorial at the University of Toronto where I talked about Jordan Peterson and issues of personal identity, legally sanctioned identity categories, etc. I brought up a video of a tall white man in his 30s who asked students at a university how they'd react if he told them he identified as a woman, as black, as short, and as 5 years old. Spoiler alert. Students in the video resist some of the later categories a bit, but are mostly accepting. Still, students were not engaging in discussion. I asked them why. One said it was because she was worried to share her opinion for fear of being singled out or saying something offensive. I asked who else was not speaking for that reason. The whole class put their hands up. That was shocking to me. I encouraged them to speak despite their worries, and they gave me some good feedback on how to make it easier for them to do so. For instance, by working in pairs and being assigned an opinion so that they didn't have to be responsible for it or feel bad for defending it. No participation. Why? They weren't uninterested. They were afraid to speak their minds. The PC police are in your heads. What this top lawyer told me. If I'm taken in front of the Human Rights Tribunal, it will cost me $250,000. I will pay the legal costs for my opponents, and I will lose. He said, go back to your safe little life and shut your mouth. Second lawyer told me, my critique of the Ontario Human Rights Commission is spot on. And absent the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which has these contradictions built into it that you just heard described, much of what I was saying was illegal and has been illegal since 2012. Lawyer 3 told me that if I breached a tribunal order, so imagine I was taken in front of the Human Rights Tribunal and I was fined and then I refused to pay the fine, which I've stated that I would do. That equals contempt of court, which inevitably means jail until the contempt is purged. He told me the social justice tribunals, and that's the technical name of these essentially extrajudicial bodies in Ontario, by the way, the social justice tribunals, so the PC authoritarian types aren't even trying to hide their terminology anymore. The social justice tribunals and the SJWs, social justice warriors who staff them, have a rogue nature. They can search your house without a warrant. They can use secret hearings. There are no rules of evidence, and the judges are unaccountable. Your worst fears of the effect of a poorly written law will manifest in that environment. The SJWs say only the worst of the worst will get punished. Think again, with them at the helm, anything can and does happen. But those are legal opinions. Let's look at a real world case. Let's look at what happened when I made my videos. Let's look at how the university responded, because I can tell you, in the video I said, look, what I'm doing is probably illegal, and worse, my employer is legally responsible for it, because that's built into the codes as well. So by the way, if you're an employer, you're responsible for everything that your employees say, and everything that anybody interprets what they said as being, whether it's unintentional or intentional, whether or not a complaint has been made. So just think about that. Anyways, October 3rd, the university said, like all members of the university community, I have an obligation to comply with the law, including the provisions of the Ontario Human Rights Code. Their policy with regards to workplace harassment, which the university implied that I was engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct, where the course of comment or conduct is known, or ought reasonably be known, to be unwelcome. That was the October 3rd letter, which was sent to me within 1 week of posting my videos. And it was the first. So what happened essentially was the university reviewed what I had done, and then they reviewed the policies as laid out on the Ontario Human Rights Commission website, where you guys can all go read them, by the way, and then you can decide if the legal information that you were just provided with is in any degree whatsoever accurate, because I would say it isn't. The university reviewed my videos and they decided that what I said was true. They decided that the video I made was probably illegal and that they were responsible for it. And so in an attempt to distance themselves from me, under counsel from their legal people, and believe me, the university has good legal people, they sent me a warning. And this is what happens if you want to discipline a recalcitrant employee, essentially, so that you don't have to bear legal responsibility for their acts. You send them a warning to show that you're not in favor of what they're doing. Then if they continue, you send them another warning. And then if they continue, you send them a third warning. And after the third warning, you can take further steps. Now, I pointed out to the university at one point when we were discussing how this forum was going to proceed, that perhaps it would be in their best interests to not support the people who were trying to stop me from talking, but instead to support me legally and if necessary to take this all the way to the Supreme Court, and the university said categorically that they would not do that. So I would say when it comes to the contradictory provisions that are in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and so we might say roughly equality versus freedom of speech, the university decided which side they're going to go down on. And you know, people tell you all the time that this has to do with compassion, you know, and it's obviously the case that all of the compassion in this discussion is on the side of the people who are encouraging their listeners to play victim and perpetrator. And I can tell you as a psychoanalytically oriented psychologist that there's nothing more horrible for children and developing people than an excessive compassion, right? That's the standard Freudian devouring mother. And if you want a little archetype to go along with that, I suppose most of you, what the hell's going on here exactly? And why are we damn near at each other's throats? Look at what happened in the United States a week and a half ago. There's some things to talk about here, and I started to try to talk about them, and I would say that my freedom to do so was rapidly infringed upon. My career was put at risk, and I find this absolutely unacceptable because I am trying to sort this out. And believe me, you know what you call people you can't talk to? Enemies. And if we want to divide our society into armed camps of enmity, all we have to do is keep doing what we're doing. And I would recommend that we don't do this. I've studied authoritarianism for a very long time. I know what happens when things get out of control, and it can happen extraordinarily rapidly. And I would say we're on the cusp of that. And so we need to start talking and listening. And when you talk, it doesn't mean you're right. It doesn't mean you're correct, right? It means you're trying to articulate and formulate your thoughts like the boneheaded moron that you are. And you're going to stumble around idiotically because what the hell do you know? You're full of biases and you're ignorant and you can't speak very well and you're over-emotional. And you know, you've got just problems that you can hardly even imagine that are interfering with your ability to state something clear. And so what you do is you do your best to say what you mean, and then you listen to other people tell you why you're a blithering idiot, and hopefully you can correct yourself to some degree as a consequence of listening to them. And you see, that's what free speech is about. Millions of people have been tuning into this online. And so obviously something's up, and I can tell you that what's up isn't only a discussion about Bill C-16 and about gendered pronouns. You know, sometimes when you're having a debate or a discussion with someone that you love and you're having a little argument about something, like who's going to do the dishes or something like that, or you know how it, especially if you haven't been getting along very well with that person, you know how the discussion starts with something specific and then you start trading all the things that it might be about until you're arguing about, you know, the way that you behaved on your third date, you know, 10 years ago, and the whole underlying unresolved chaos of your relationship emerges through the little portal that was defined by the argument. You know, well, that's what this is about. So, for a variety of reasons, I've been keeping an eye on political correctness for a long time, and I was also very upset with the Human Resources and Equity Department's decision to make anti-racism, so-called anti-racism and anti-bias training mandatory for their staff, which I regard as an unacceptable intrusion into their staff's right to their political opinion, as well as noting that there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that mandatory anti-racism and anti-bias training has the impact that is claimed. In fact, the empirical evidence suggests quite the contrary. When you mandate that sort of thing, you actually make people more prejudiced. It's also based on what I would say is a rather pernicious form of pseudoscience that's been promoted by social psychologists, a group that I have a fair bit of trouble with, and that's been transformed into a kind of educational fascism that has no grounding whatsoever in the empirical literature. Now, what...
All right, and I think that's a good summary of some of the good points he made during that debate. But ask yourself, did you detect any hate speech there, any bigotry? If anything, I noticed a ton of introspection. So now we'll take a look at Dr. Mary Bryson. Now this article here, and as you can see I had to pull all of this from my older video, so prepare yourselves for MS Paint. But this article is no longer available on Ottawa Citizen, so it had presumably been taken down. Christine Blanchford, University of British Columbia professor who denounced University of Toronto colleague in gender debate, has skeletons in her own closet. Imagine that. Dr. Mary Bryson was speaking at a University of Toronto forum last Saturday about recent amendments that could add gender identity and gender expression as protected grounds to the Canadian Human Rights Code and the Criminal Code. In September, University of Toronto psychology professor Jordan Peterson spoke out against these amendments. They recently passed in the House of Commons and vowed not to use the genderless pronouns they affect in the mandate, saying such language rules are an assault on objectivity and biology. Bryson compared him to the notorious Felipe Rushton, a Western University professor who years ago linked brain size to the alleged intellectual capacity of the races and suggested that Peterson had distributed totally bogus claims and was in total dereliction of academic responsibility. But a former student of Bryson's Women's Studies 425 course at the University of British Columbia in 1991 says Bryson forced the students to declare their sexual orientation, like to spring violent pornography on them, and taught that all sex with men is inherently violent. Thursday, through a letter from her lawyer Lisa Martz, Bryson denied some of the specifics of what the woman says, in particular that she forced students to declare their sexual orientation, or that she said all sex with men was. But Bryson acknowledged that other incidents did occur. One thing I found entirely interesting about trying to find this article, however, is that the only article about Mary Bryson that still exists on Google, at least at the time that I'm recording this video, is the one saying that she was attacked online and that trolls attacked her, but really they were critics asking her about her past because this article had come up. So I found that a bit interesting, but let's dive back into it. Since it's been scrubbed from the internet, it's kind of interesting, right? Among the pornography Bryson showed, the woman says was Butch/Femme in Paradise, a short video that contains graphic fisting. Bryson agreed the film was screened, but said that it is an art film and that the activities in there were entirely consensual. The former student describes classes that were harrowing, especially for young women then 21 from a small Ontario town. On one occasion, she says, a guest speaker suddenly dropped her pants, stood before the glass naked from the waist down, and showed us her black satin strap-on penis. Yes, this really happened. The students sat there in stunned, awkward silence. We had no idea what to say, or what to do, or where to look. Bryson confirmed the incident, but said the presenter unexpectedly showed a dildo while demonstrating the correct way to use condoms. Dr. Bryson had no advanced knowledge the presenter would do that, her lawyer says, and intervened as quickly as possible to stop the demonstration. Now 46 and a writer living in the United States, the former student was watching the University of Toronto debate online last Saturday and says that she almost fell out of her chair when Bryson was introduced as one of the panelists. The woman asked that her name not be published, but the university and Bryson have been told who she is. 25 years ago, the woman says she complained about Bryson to the then education dean and believes that several other students did as well. We told them everything that was happening, she told Post Media in telephone and email interviews this week. I assumed that Bryson wouldn't be permitted to teach at the University of British Columbia anymore. But Bryson's career continued its upward trajectory such that she is a respected academic and senior administrator. After securing tenure at the University of British Columbia, she became the director of the school's Institute for Gender, Race, Sexuality, and Social Justice, and this summer was named Senior Associate Dean of the Education faculty. The course the former student took ran only a half term and was formally called From the Margins, Lesbian Subjects Matter. To confirm her memory of those long ago days, the woman had her mother, who still lives in Ontario, this week dig out her syllabus and notes. She eventually graduated from University of British Columbia with her master's in religious studies. She earned her undergraduate degree at York University. Post Media first contacted Bryson and the education dean, Bly Frank, early Wednesday with an email laying out in detail the students' allegations. Dr. Angela Reddish, provost and acting academic vice president, responded the same day saying, "We take seriously any concerns raised by past or current students about their learning experience at the University of British Columbia." But she said the university needs some time to look through our files as this involves a course taught 25 years ago. Thursday, Post Media received a letter from the lawyer Martz, who said Bryson would participate in whatever appropriate process the UBC might offer. The deal with the allegations and expressed concerns about my commentary reflecting a homophobic, transphobic, and anti-feminist bias. Yet no one can categorically deny the course content because Bryson herself wrote about it, confirming some of what the former student describes in 1993. In an article called Queer Pedagogy, Praxis Makes Imperfect, published that year in the Canadian Journal of Education, Bryson and co-author Suzanne DeCastel describe a course that they say they co-taught in 1991. The former student doesn't know DeCastel, though she said in class Bryson was always accompanied by a woman who was never introduced. In the scholarly piece, Bryson and de Castell say that they co-taught this course at an unidentified major urban Canadian university and envisioned it as an amalgam of performance art. The authors said that they structured it around a series of presentations by local lesbians such as the Kiss and Tell Collective, a trio of Vancouver-based performance artists. Bryson and de Castell wrote that they told the heterosexual and white students that they would have to function and circulate differently in a lesbian-identified space. They suggested that students choose either to remain silent about their sexual identification or to present themselves as out lesbians. But the paper is filled with descriptions of students such as, quote, white bisexually identified, heterosexually identified, white working class lesbian, and lesbian of color. It's certainly clear that professors knew the sexual orientation of everyone in class. The authors, who were adamant that they had created a class where the unsayable could be uttered, where so-called deviant images could be represented within the oppressive confines of the already heterosexualized classroom. The woman says that she'd taken women's studies courses at York, but never before had taken a class where misandry, which is hatred of men, was taught to you. Heterosexuals were deemed the enemy, she says, and those of us who liked men, who had intimate relationships with men, were mocked for habits such as shaving their legs and for wearing skirts. We were scared every day, she says. That's the end of the video. Thanks everyone for watching. Please comment, let me know what you guys think. I will be streaming games pretty frequently soon at twitch.tv/Everdread, and if you would like to contact me, hit me up on Twitter at GameandBalls. I'll see you guys later.